Can't get anything done when you're perfectionist. So that's why we have editors. All right, here we go. Welcome to the My Sanpete podcast, where we explore history, activities, fun things to do in Sanpete County. And today we are spotlighting a longtime resident of Sanpete County, Troy Shelley. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So today we want to explore the topic of how to enact positive change in your local community and what we can do today to do that.
Okay.
So first off, I guess if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of background info on, what led you to some of the projects and businesses and offices that you've been involved with.
Okay. I think I've always been kind of an entrepreneur. I remember even as a kid making up a little game and trying to charge the neighbor kids to play it. I think it was just something that I did from early on. But I really enjoy getting involved in business. I worked for the radio station in Manti for about 13 years, and I just went and did marketing with businesses, and I got to know how businesses function, what they need to do to be successful, and integrate good marketing plans, and that was a lot of fun and very educational. I went to college. Most of the stuff that I studied in college was in marketing. And so I eventually broke away from the radio station, which is an excellent job and super good people there. But then I started doing the cellular phone business here, and we sold a lot of phones. We sold cell phones before cell phones were even here for people that were traveling out of the area, and we did that for quite a few years, and then I broke away from that a little bit and invested into an oil well with some friends of mine. Can I recommend you not invest in an oil well? Probably. If somebody, I guess it was told to me, if it's not good enough for the Texans, it's not good enough for us. And that's good philosophy.
Good advice. Thank you.
So we invested in a well that ended up not hitting oil, but an industrial gas. And so our little group just started getting on the internet and starting doing research and find out who would be interested in that industrial gas. And come to find out, it's really difficult to find financing for someone who can put up the money to build an industrial gas plant. So we struggled with that for quite a while, and I mean, we didn't have any money. We would scrape together every bit of money that we had to be able to find initially to find financing. And in our naive look at things, we thought, well, we have this. Let's just go to a bank, and a bank will give us financing. Banks do not finance risk, and People have said often, they say, well, a bank's willing to finance you after you've proven that you don't need them. That's correct. That's the role of a bank.
You just saved a ton of entrepreneurs a lot of time.
Yep.
So thank you.
Yep, it does. Don't go to banks because banks don't finance risk. They only finance something that's proven. And so what we had to do is we had to find individuals who would put up the money, and it was a lot of money, millions of dollars, to be able to build this plant. And every one of these finance groups would come to us and they'd say, okay, we can probably finance you, but we need you to do a reservoir study. And so there's $15,000-$20,000 to do a reservoir study. And then the next guy comes along and he's like, well, I see your products there, but we need to see that you have the technology to be able to produce it. So then we'd do whatever it takes to show that we have the technology. And then the next ones would come along and say, well, we can see you've got the technology and you've got the product, but how do you know people are going to buy it? And so then we would have to we did a market survey, a market study, and that was about $15,000 or $20,000, which is no small dollar amount for our little group. And so we would do that. And finally, we got all of the pieces together to where it's like, okay, this is solid. And once we had that, then the financing came easier. Now, I'll give fair warning to anyone who's looking for financing. There's a lot of people who will come and say, hey, if you pay us X number of dollars so that we spend the time on your project, we can find you financing. And so we did that a couple of times. We paid people $5,000 each time to go out and try and get us financing. And then they would come back and either have some crazy weird deal, like one guy we had came back and he said, well, we can get you financing, but your project's too small. We want to turn it into twice as big as what you're talking about. I'm like, no, we have economics for what we have. And they just wouldn't finance it because they wanted a big deal. And they weren't really watching out for their investors. They were just, I don't know what was going on there.
Yeah.
But eventually we got a group out of Las Vegas who put their money in and started to build this plant and put it together. And about the time that we were getting towards the end of getting the plant completed, we had a lot of the major industrial gas suppliers come to us and say, hey, we want to buy your product. And so we committed some long-term contracts to those companies. And about the time that we got up and going, there was a big discovery in Carbon County that used our product a lot. And so it kind of maxed our plan out, and it was a great start. And it took off and did very well. And we produced gas for about 5 years. A group came to us and wanted to buy us out. And, we were kind of on top of our game. I wasn't super excited about selling out, but I think in the end it was the right thing to do. And so we sold the plant, but we kept the source. So we still supply them their gas, and then they liquefy it and clean it and sell it to market.
Wow.
So.
That's so when you began this project, I mean, as entrepreneurship often goes, you don't know all the pieces when you begin, right? So that, when you talk about all of the different studies and things that you had to do, was that baffling to you as you went through this process?
It was difficult because we had to keep scraping money together to be able to do this. The one advice I would have on starting a business, I love entrepreneurship. I think Sanpete, Juab, these areas are the land of opportunity. I think there are so many possibilities of making money and providing good service to our community. The one advice I would definitely give is start as small as possible. Don't just jump in and say, hey, this is a multi-million-dollar deal. Let's just jump in with both feet. Start small, make your business force you to grow rather than you try to force the business to grow. I think that's probably the key to success. A lot of businesses fail in the first 5 years, and that's probably a big contributing factor is when people get in too deep, too fast.
Yeah, great advice. I think that proof of concept mentality, build as you go. I think that's really, really great advice.
Yep.
For our budding entrepreneurs in Sanpete County. I see a lot of entrepreneurship going on down here in Sanpete County. And I know you interact with a lot of different entrepreneurs in Sanpete County. What do you think is kind of the landscape and where is it going down here?
So I think anyone who's willing to jump in and run with it, as long as their plan is viable, they can make it work. If it doesn't work on paper, it doesn't work in real life. So you have to be honest with yourself. You have to sit down. You have to lay it out. You have to show it. Don't give too much credit to advertising. And advertising was my world. And I believe advertising is the answer to success. But don't look at it and say, well, gosh, if there's 20,000 people in this valley, through advertising, I can get at least 10% of those. Well, no, you can't. You can't. You can get a very, very small fraction of those. And off of that small fraction, can you be successful? And so be honest with yourself, because you have to look at it from a very real standpoint. And if you can put it down on paper and it works on paper, you can look at competitors, see what other people are doing, see how successful they are. The best place to find an avenue to get into business is if someone is overcharging for their services. That's the free market right there. If they charge too much and you can come in and take a piece of that, there's a good start. So as you're looking at entrepreneurial ideas, just find a service that isn't being offered, or find a service that you can offer better. Or the other option is to buy out a mismanaged business.
Yeah, I think you really touched on something that I've run into a few times locally, is the service piece. So not only are they overcharging, but if they are dragging out deadlines, or if they are, not serving their customers well, that's another indication that there is an opportunity.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
so.
There's an opening there. If people don't follow through with what they say they're going to do. In fact, we added some bookshelves in our house, and this has been a few years ago, but the company that we used, they said, we will be there on this date. Can you be prepared for us? So we said, yep. So we cleaned our house out, and the day before they called and said, we're coming. Are you still planning on us? Yes. They came, they showed up, they did exactly what they said they were going to do. After they were done, about a week later, they called and said, is there anything we missed? Is there anything that we could have done better? How would you change it? We're like, nope, we got exactly what we thought we were getting. Perfect example. And then there's others who are like, yeah, we'll be here next week, and you don't see them for a month. There's your opening. And
Right.
and if you have expertise, and when I say expertise, I don't mean you have to be a complete expert, but if you have the ability to go in, you'll soon become an expert after you've done it enough times. But your point's a great point. Follow through is so important. I would use that company again to build shelves or cabinetry, because they were just so spot on.
Well, and I think word of mouth carries a lot of weight in small communities too. And so if you can delight your customers, follow through, that's going to cut your advertising budget quite a bit as well. You won't need as large of a budget, because these small communities are pretty tight knit.
Yep. And it's a good point. Let me just point something out about word of mouth. There is one of the most valuable points of advertising is you put your name out there. Particularly in this area, radio is very strong. You put your name out there, and it causes people to talk. And they say, oh, have you heard about this company? Oh, I've dealt with that company. And that's where word of mouth comes in. And you can't advertise enough to take care of bad reputation. So word of mouth is good. But if your business is not great, you may not want to cause people to talk about you.
Right. I think that customer service component really long-term really carries a lot of weight, even in the short term, if you are able to have good business, because there's not the competition maybe in the valley yet. That it's a long-term play to serve your customer well.
Yeah. The other thing about the word of mouth is here in these communities, we understand the importance of taking care of customers, because if we don't, we know that people are going to talk and we're going to lose business. It's a good reason to buy local. It's a good reason not to just go to the person who shows up at your door saying, hey, we're selling windows. You don't do that, because if they do a crappy job, they don't care, and they're not coming back, and they're not from this community, and there's nothing you can say to keep people from doing business with them, because they're gone. You do business with people here. I don't even know that we pay more for it. Sometimes people think, well, if I buy local, it's going to cost me more. I'm not sure that's the case, but I do know that people are more accountable if they do business here in the community.
Well, and I think that's a good thing to consider if you are, paying more money for a service locally. You have to build into that price point the premium factor of service that you're going to be getting long term, because they have a vested interest in serving you as their customer, and they know the value of the word of mouth. I think that's probably the best case I've heard for shopping locally.
Yeah. And besides that, the businesses here integrate with the community. You hear them sponsoring games. You see them come to the games, ball games, and they're involved in their school districts, and they're involved in the community events and stuff like that. The people who just show up and then leave, they're not involved in any of that. They're just here for the money, and that's really not what our community is about.
Yeah, that's good to consider. So I've heard that there's been some other business dealings that you have pursued that have kind of brought forth like an intersection between business and entrepreneurship and politics. And so I was wondering if you could talk to us about that specific venture.
Yeah, so there's been a few different times, but I'll tell you about one specific one. It's maybe a little bit of a long story, but I'm going to go through it so that you get the full picture. So my cousin and I decided that we would start digging rocks, because Sanpete has plenty of rocks, and for some reason people up north like to buy them. So we thought, hey, let's buy an excavator, and we'll go dig rocks and sell rocks to the landscapers. And so we started doing that on our property, not on state property or federal property. And I got a note on my front gate that says you may be in violation of state law XYZ, whatever it is, and you need to call us. So I called and I said, hey, I've got this notice, and the guy, he said, we ought to meet because there are certain laws that you have to abide by. And I said, okay, so let's meet and talk. So he came down and he says, well, basically, in order to do what you're doing, you have to do an archaeological study to make sure there's no archaeological finds on your property. And you have to do a raptor study to make sure you're not disturbing any of the raptor nesting grounds. And then you have to have a reclamation plan. And I said, okay, so all of this is on my property, right? And he's like, yeah, unfortunately, that's just how it is. And I said, well, so then what? And he said, well, you'll have to post a bond, and it's $50,000. And I said, so I have to post a $50,000 bond to dig rocks on my own property? And he says, yeah, it's a reclamation bond. We require that. And I said, a reclamation bond. So this is so that I reclaim the property to whose standard? And he says, well, to the landowner's standard. And I said, okay, so this doesn't make sense to me. You want me to pay you $50,000 or pay to the state of Utah $50,000 to hold my money so that when I'm done, I reclaim my property according to my standard, and then you give me my money back? And he goes, yeah, it kind of sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? And I says, no, it is ridiculous, isn't it? And he says, yeah, it is, but that's the law. And I said, okay, so what else do I need to do to be able to just dig rocks? And he gave me a list, and there were, I think, about 23 items on this list. And I said, is this a complete list of everything that I need to do? And he goes, yes, it is. I said, okay, I need you to take this list and go back to your office, and I want you to break it into what's legislative and what's internal policy. Because legislative is what my representative thinks you're doing, and internal policy is where government overreach comes. So I need you to break this into legislative and internal policy. And so about 10 days later, he called up and he says, okay, I've got your list for you. Let's meet and talk about it. So I said, okay, well, let's meet out at the Rocks and talk about it. And so right before we met, I called and said, are we still on? And he says, yeah, I'm planning on being there at 4:00. And I said, okay, well, I'm bringing my legislator with me. And he goes, okay. So we got out there and started talking about things. And my legislator says, yeah, I don't think I'm okay with this because this doesn't sound right. And, many times people hear, or you'll say yourself, gosh, there ought to be a law against this. Yes, you're probably right. And most laws need to be to restrict the government entity from overreaching their bound. It isn't that we need more laws. It's that the government entities sometimes gets a little bit of power, and then they want to expand that power, and that's where the overreach comes. So to make a long story short, we met with the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining and Natural Resources and some other people up at the state, and my legislator wrote a law to remove rocks from the purview of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, and now there's no restrictions on private property. But that's how I engaged the legislature in fixing an issue that we had. So what it did is welcome everyone to the rock business, because now there's no $50,000 threshold that you have to meet in order to sell rocks. All you need to do is find somebody who wants to buy them and go dig them and sell them. Now, that shouldn't take away from the fact that we are a country, a nation, a state of laws. I get laws. We have to have laws or we get chaos. And you see some of the chaos going on around the country. We get into chaos when we have laws, but laws are not enforced. Or if there's laws that need to be enforced, that sometimes people refuse to enforce. So we are a nation of laws, but when we have a government entity generally that oversteps its bounds, then that's what our politicians are there for, is to protect our rights and to stand between the government entity and us.
That story is so impressive to me because you saw a problem, and in that process, you just gave yourself a ton of competition for your business, right? Why did you do it?
Because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that so many times, and I certainly am not opposed to government. I think government is very important. I think we need to have laws. That's how we give structure. But sometimes people get in a position of power and they start believing that they don't have a boss. I am the top. I am the chief. And when that happens, then they overstep their bounds. And that's why we have legislators to keep them within their bounds.
So a lot of people, well, I'll speak personally. I would never think to do any of those steps. I don't have the background in politics. And maybe some of our listeners feel the same way. They feel like if somebody had come to them and restricted them in this business venture, they would have said, okay, that's the law and I will have to abide by it. But you knew more to push back and ask the right questions. How did you know how to do all of this? What's the background story of how did you know?
So the one thing that I understand, and I hope that everybody can come away from this understanding, is when you have a representative, they should be your representative. They don't represent the government. When you have somebody who's in the Senate or someone in the House, they're not there to represent the government. They're there to represent the community who elected them. And sometimes they forget that, because all day long while they're in session, They sit in these meetings where these government entities come in and say, we need more money for this and we need more money for that. And they start to think that they represent that entity instead of the people. And they have a balancing act because they still have to fund the entity, but they don't have to fund the waste. And so that representative really needs to stand between the entity and the citizens, not only from a tax standpoint, but from a legislative standpoint, so that we don't get stepped on. And again, if you hear people say, gosh, there ought to be a law against that, you're probably right. And the simple avenue, there's an avenue in. That is, you have a representative. You contact that representative and you say, look, I think this is an overreach and we need to correct it. And if that representative listens to you and then says, oh, yeah, I'm not going to do anything, that's fine. That's their prerogative to do, but elect them out on the next term. And, you elect good representation and then you hold them accountable. One thing that I decided early on in politics, and I knew nothing about politics. In fact, Spencer Cox and John Cox came to my house one day and said, hey, we want you to run for the county chair. I'm like, I don't know anything about this. And they said, well, that's fine. You'll learn. And so I got involved in that aspect, and I got elected as the county chair. And I always saw my role as find good candidates and help them get elected. And that is the challenge to everyone. Find good candidates, help them get elected. Now, one thing, so here's the trade-off, and here's the thing to really look at, is if we're going to find good candidates, what is the criteria? And the criteria in my mind is find candidates who believe in agency. If they believe that, if my representative believes that I can make a better decision than the government can make, then I have a good representative. It's when the government starts overstepping their bounds, saying we're from the government and we know what's best, and they don't listen to the voice of the people, then you got to elect them out, or in the case of finding good candidates, find candidates who believe in agency, someone who trusts the people. And I trust everyone, and I also believe that sometimes people are going to mess up and make mistakes, and that's okay, because that's part of life. But you don't elect people who continually take that agency away. You've got to elect people who trust the citizens.
So sometimes we hear politicians as they are campaigning, and maybe that's our view of what they will do. But then when they are elected, maybe things change a little bit. How do we test these candidates before we elect them? What's the strategy of really vetting them?
I think that's the core, is watch them and see if they believe in agency. Just listen to what they say. Look at their character. Look at whatever you can possibly glean from them, because you're right. Most politicians are willing to say anything that they need to say in order to get elected. You can't trust that. You have got to look at their actions. You've got to look and say, does this person, to their very core, believe in agency? That, in my opinion, that is the litmus test. Because if they believe in agency, ultimately they believe in their citizens. If they don't believe that you can be trusted to make your best decision, then I don't think I would trust them.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to consider, especially as we're coming up on another election year. There's going to be a lot of decisions for citizens to make, and what we want to see in the future. You know, sometimes we get our ballots, and they say, do we want to retain this person, or what kind of, if we don't know these people personally, if they're maybe not super public figures in their in their position. Even some of these positions are not very well documented really in the news. What can we do to research beyond just watching them and listening to them? What other resources do we have for that transparency?
A lot of it is hard to know. Particularly the one you're talking about is, do we want to retain our judge, our district judge? I think we should be looking at their character. A lot of these cases are available online. I don't know how much people are willing to search, but the one thing, and it particularly does come down to the judges. Judges are easy to replace. It isn't our responsibility. They get appointed through the Attorney General's office. But if we have an arrogant judge, we replace him. So maybe a good time to replace ours.
Okay. So tell me some resources online where we can go do some of this research, because there's a lot. I mean, I think one of the problems that maybe citizens, or at least this is something that I can speak to, is it's very time consuming to do your own research on some of these people and the individuals and their track record. What would you say is a good strategy for doing some of this research prior to elections?
I would love for people to do this research. All public meetings are recorded and there's minutes. I listen to a lot of recordings, particularly in Sanpete County right now. I listen to what's going on, and you should listen to those. I've had a little conflict in this county trying to get something corrected, and one thing I appreciated is someone who called me who said, "Hey, can I talk with you about politics?" I'm like, "Sure." So I went and I met with her, and she said, "I want you to know that I appreciate what you've been doing for a special service district in Sanpete County." She said, "I haven't been to any of the meetings, but I have pulled and listened to all of the recordings." And she said, "I cannot believe what's going on." Well, I appreciate someone who actually has done that research. You can pull the recordings. They're public information. They're available for everyone. If you want to know somebody's stance on something, pull the recording, or if you don't have time to listen to the recording, because they're generally about an hour long, if you don't have time to listen to the recording, pull the minutes and just glance through the minutes, find the things that are interesting to you. The website, I'm trying to think of where it's at. I think it's on utah.gov, but if you just go to utah.gov and type in public meetings, I wish I knew what the exact address was, but I'm sure you can get it through that.
So, Troy, tell us a little bit about your past political involvement and some of the campaigns that you've been involved with.
Okay. So I really engaged. I mean, I've always got involved in the caucus convention system. I've always got involved with that. Where I really engaged is after I was talked to about running for the county chair. Then I started to figure, okay, what's the job of the county chair? And the county chair, their responsibility is really to find good candidates and help them get elected. And so I started looking at candidates who represented our values, because values in this state vary dramatically. Everything from Sanpete values to Salt Lake values, and there's that wide of a spread. Mm-hmm. So I initially got behind, Mike Lee would have been the first one, and then Mia Love. I worked very closely with Mia Love because that was soon after I was elected as the county chair. And Mia actually called the night of the election when she won, and she said, "Troy, I owe Sanpete County for this victory," because she said the results were so close, and yet Sanpete County showed up so strong and so so conservative that they pushed me over the edge. So she said, we owe this to Sanpete County.
Wow.
Well, now, obviously, she had all of the other people voting for her too, but Sanpete County does get politically involved, and our residents are smart. They understand what they're looking for.
And that speaks to how important it is to let your voice be heard in every election, because you never know when it is going to have that effect of, putting that candidate in a good position.
Yep. So it did help her. Then I got involved with. I've been very involved with Burgess Owens because he's had some hard races. He's unopposed now, but he's had a couple of very hard races. And when I say get involved, that means I drive to Salt Lake. I go pick up signs. I take the signs out and go put up, I don't know, a couple hundred signs for Burgess is what I've done. And I did that the same for Mike Lee. I put up a bunch of signs for him. So yeah, getting involved means doing everything you can to help good people get elected. And that's one thing that I did. And I want to talk a little bit about the caucus convention system and how this whole thing works. Because this is where individuals can get involved and make a difference. So on March 5th is a convention where delegates get elected. And so, a lot of times people say, well, that's the democratic process. Well, we have a democratic process, and that is all of the residents get together, and in their neighborhoods, they elect representatives. Once those representatives are elected, then the process is a constitutional republic. That means we have now delegated our vote to our elected delegate in our community. So when you go to the convention or to elect these delegates, you're going to be elect someone from your community, and then that delegate represents your voice at a higher level, which is either a county delegate or a state delegate. And the county delegates are the ones who ultimately vote for county commission, county offices. That's where that vote happens. And then the state delegates are elected to vote for the statewide candidates. And then we also have a federal delegation of delegates that vote on a federal level.
Okay, so if somebody locally wants to become either a county delegate or a state delegate, what would be the process for them to do that?
Okay, go to your meeting, and I don't know if they have a location secured yet. A lot of times it's been at Manti High School or at Ephraim Elementary School, or maybe Ephraim Middle School. But just watch when that comes out and just go. You can go. Everyone can and should go to these meetings because it's how you get involved. And part of the downside also with this caucus and convention system is when you get politicians who so bad want to get elected that they stack the delegates. So here's an example of a previous presidential candidate who came to a previous college president and asked that college president to send all of the college students over to the convention to make sure their delegate gets elected. And that kind of ruins the system. It takes the integrity out of it. And sure, the real answer is if enough of the community would have shown up, then the students couldn't have elected their delegate. But enough of the locals didn't come that the students were able to elect their state delegates who then, after they voted for this candidate, then they left and went home, and Sanpete County was left without any delegates, or without delegates from that area because they were gone. So
this wasn't locally in Sanpete County that you're talking about. This is or you're saying yes.
Oh, sure, it could have been Sanpete. Yes, it was.
Okay. So where do these meetings get posted?
You'll see them in the newspapers. It'll be pretty well advertised. You'll see signs up about it, and I know that they'll run ads on the radio saying, come to the convention. And you can easily email myself or anyone really to find out, anybody who's in a political position, just say, hey, where's this convention going to be?
And so is there a time if somebody decides they want to be involved in this? Is there a time that they have to sign up before the convention, I assume? Or
yeah,
how does that work?
When they come to the convention, they'll check their registration because it is partisan. So those who are registered as a Republican can vote for a Republican. Those who are registered as a Democrat can vote for a Democrat. But they can change their party affiliation while they're there, which what we saw in the last election and what we'll see again is we'll see particularly a lot of the Democrat Party will try to stack the Republican vote so that the Republicans vote more, so that if they can get those delegates, then they'll vote more liberal than conservative.
Okay, got it. Okay. And so you said March 5th, and is that for all the parties, March 5th?
I don't know if it's for the Democrat Party or not. I know it's for the Republican Party.
Okay, yeah. Okay, great. So in this upcoming election, we've talked about a number of things that people can do to make their voices be heard and become involved. What else are we missing, or what are maybe the key issues that people need to be thinking about, other ways to get involved that you feel are important for people to understand?
Okay. If someone doesn't want to get into, be elected as a delegate, still come and have your voice be heard. Listen to what these potential delegates, because whoever's nominated, they'll have a chance to address their community, their neighborhood, and voice their opinion of what they think about different political issues or whatever, and then vote for the delegate that most aligns with your philosophy. The one thing, and here's something to look at with candidates. Particularly, let's look at the school boards. We elect school board members, and if they're elected, and someone else is elected on a state level, their elected position on a state level does not supersede a person who's elected on a countywide level. They're both elected. And sometimes we see that overstep where people think, well, I was elected by more people, so I have more say or whatever. It just isn't the case. We elect people to represent us. Here's an example. Last week at the legislature, there were 2 bills concerning education. One of them is should we put armed security in every school in the state? Okay, well, we want to protect our kids. Should the other issue is should we require every school to post the 10 Commandments? Okay, interesting topics. My question is why is the legislature deciding this? This is a school board decision. It belongs in the schools. The school board should be the ones who make this decision. You get some schools, maybe West High School maybe needs 3 security guards, where Tinnick High School doesn't require one because you pull into town and they may have a few people follow them to the school. There's just so many varying situations that I don't know that a one-size-fits-all works, nor is it designed to. You shouldn't have a legislator saying to a school district, here's what you need to do. Now, there are times when I suppose that they have to, but they shouldn't do it through an unfunded mandate. If they're going to do it, they should fund it. And in this case, let's say security guards is the issue. The school boards should send to the state school board their recommendation for what their schools need. And then the state school board should go to the legislature and say, here are the needs in our schools. We're asking for this funding to fund what our school boards have asked for. That, in my viewpoint, is how it's supposed to work. If you pull, particularly, I don't understand this, but you pull Sanpete County's minutes in their county commission meetings, and you'll have the county clerk come, the county sheriff come, people who are elected in this county, and they have a budget that is allocated to them by the county commission. Once they have a budget, why do they need to go back to the county commission to get approval for how they spend their budget? They're elected. They're elected the same as a county commissioner. Now, a county commissioner has kind of two things that they oversee. They have to oversee kind of a legislative role as well as an administrative role. But I just don't get why an elected official has to go back for permission on how they spend their budget. We just have to respect the lanes that we're in. That's what I see is when you're elected to stay in your lane and to not overstep somebody else's elected position.
Yeah, that's really great to understand how it should work and how it's designed to work. There are some issues that get through into our schools that maybe didn't go through the proper channels. Can you kind of speak to how that happens? Like, for example, maybe curriculum changes to a school. How would that happen?
Exactly. How would that happen? If our school boards, if they determine that something should be in the schools, we should trust our school boards. And if we don't trust our school boards, we should elect them out. That's how it works. You replace the people who don't uphold your values. And to be honest, you may be absolutely convinced that one thing is right and the school board doesn't agree with you. And so then you do everything you can to elect them out. And if they still are in, then you're probably the one in the minority on that opinion. Here's a little visual example. Let's say that you have a little calf and you're feeding that calf out of a bucket, or feeding a bucket of milk in the morning and a bucket of milk at night. The calf will be perfectly healthy and strong. But if you take that same bucket and you poke 8 holes into the bottom of the bucket and you still put the same amount of milk in the bucket and you feed the calf's going to starve to death because there's so many holes in the bottom of the bucket, there's not enough for the calf to eat. That's what we're facing right now in public education. There's so many holes in the bottom of the bucket. A person that I was talking with said, and this is her words, not mine. She says, we've tapped out everything we can from the citizens on property tax. What would you do to increase the amount of money going into education, because education doesn't have enough money? And my answer is I don't know if education has enough money or not. And that's an honest answer. I don't know if there's enough money. But I do know that once we fill the holes in the bottom of the bucket and get those plugged, then we'll have a better idea whether or not we need more money in education. But right now, everybody, if they're in a political position, they pretty much vote to put more money in education. And we just have to stop the holes. We have to stop it from running out of the bottom. And probably the best way to do that is to turn the ship. Get the school boards sending their budget to the state school board, who then goes and presents to the legislature. Then if somebody's approached in the legislature and said, hey, let's fund a road that we have no business funding, the legislator will shoot them down and they can't go back to the school board because the school board says, no, that's not in our budget. So somehow we have to start managing again from the bottom up instead of from the top down.
Well, and I think that's such an important concept for people to understand. We think about federal politics as mandating everything from the top down. That's really not in practice how it works. And I think if you look at the funding sources from top candidates that then fund small communities, you can see that how important local elections are in the grand scheme of things, and local political proceedings and how that works. And so I think this just speaks to how important it is for every citizen to become involved and aware of how they can really make their voices heard.
Yep. In every instance, you just, as you look for candidates who are running for office, just look for those who will push it back to a local level. Obviously the state is the one who collects most of the tax dollars. The state needs to be funding the necessities, but make sure it's funded from the bottom up and not the top down, because anytime it's top down, there's going to be abuse. There's too much money. Education by far is the biggest expense to the state. Initially, when the pioneers first came to Utah, one of the first things they did is they surveyed the state, and they broke the state into township ranges and sections. And then they determined that every section 2, 16, 32, and 36 would be state sections. And those are school sections. They're called Sitla Trust lands. And those school sections, any revenue generated off of those school sections would go to education. Well, then along comes a governor who had a willing legislature go along with him and said, we have hundreds of millions of dollars in our education budget, and yet our general fund is hurting. Let's take half of what's in that education budget and move it to the general fund. And I know they had justification, like we have expenses of administrating and whatever, but they cut that budget and pushed half of it into the general fund. Well, when they did that, they gutted our education program. And that fund was plenty sufficient to do our education. And maybe there would have been a time when they said, okay, we need to add a tax or whatever. I don't know. But I know that at the time there was plenty of money in education. So somehow we've got to get back to some of the basics that have worked in the past, and just start funding the things that are real. Get the money to the teachers. I'm not against administration. I just think there's a lot of administrative waste. So we've got to somehow get it back in the school, or back to the classrooms and back to the teachers, and get education funded at the education level.
So when you say that we need to follow, that's the goal that we need to achieve, would you use a similar process as you did with your business, that you were trying to, work with the government on questioning what was legislative, what was kind of administrative policy? Like, what's the path forward for you, if, or for the citizens? How do we really redirect that money, like in practice?
I think you're right. Education, I don't know that education is entirely set up as a free market. I don't know that that's really the intent. So education needs the funding because we have to have our kids educated. But there's smarter ways to do it. And the only thing I can say is the more money you can direct right to the source, the better our education system will be. So somehow we've got to get to that.
Mm-hmm. So what other issues are you thinking about in this upcoming election that you're looking out for in these different candidates that you're evaluating? What issues are really on your mind?
Probably one of the biggest ones is, will they stick to principle? Because every politician will tell you whatever they need to tell you to get elected. And you look at the price of gas now. The price of gas is coming down. Surprise. Why is that? It's because we're in an election year. And we laugh about that, but the reality is it gets manipulated just so that people start looking at it saying, gosh, maybe the economy is getting better until right after the elections. So we've got to be smarter than that. We've got to look at this and say, okay, what's real? And And again, I'm back to the same principle, agency. If a candidate trusts if a candidate trusts me to make a good decision, I probably trust that candidate. If that candidate looks at me and says, well, as a government entity, I know what's better for you than you do, then I don't think that I trust them. And I would hope that we would all look for people who understand trust, understand agency. And agency is the answer. Agency, if there's conflict anywhere, whether it's in a marriage, whether it's in a business relationship, if it's in government, it's because someone is trying to take agency away from someone else. That's where the conflict comes.
That's a good summary for kind of evaluating a lot of different obstacles that we might face in any area of our life. So I really like that mindset. Any other issues that come to mind that are really important for voters to understand and evaluate?
I would just say get engaged. We're in a critical time, and people can call some things conspiracy, whatever. Take it for what it is, but I'll throw one other issue out there that maybe people don't really understand. That's such a huge threat. It's called a natural asset company, and companies originally were formed basically to be able to get enough money together to launch larger projects, but they were formed specifically for the purpose of making money. That was what corporations were originally intended for. There's a new one now that our federal government has illustriously named the Natural Asset Company. And a natural asset company is a company that owns the environment. They protect the environment. Well, what they're able to do is, let's say that Michelle owns her own house, but you don't own the environment around it. So if I decide that you are not going to burn wood because you're polluting my environment, you can no longer burn wood. Or if you want a gas stove, if I decide that's not acceptable, then you can't have a gas stove. You certainly can't drive a gas-powered vehicle because I don't want your exhaust in my environment. It's a total takeover. There's so many things out there that we have to be aware of. And, you look at the ESG, which is just getting hammered. Well, if we think we're fighting against it, we're already too late. And the reason I can show you is look up Dun & Bradstreet and go to any company that you know of, and there is your ESG score. And an ESG is environmental, social, governance. And if you don't have a good ESG score, you cannot borrow money. If you have a good ESG score, sky's the limit. So it doesn't matter what your history of paying your debt is. It has to do with how well you are as an environmentalist, as a socialist, and adhering to the governing bodies. It's dangerous. And so you wonder why people need to get involved in politics. There you have. It's coming, and it's already here, and we've got to have people who can recognize that and push back against it. And and I'll plug Marlo Oakes is our state treasurer, probably the most brilliant state treasurer in the country, because he's very well aware of all of these things that are hitting the state of Utah. But just learn. I mean, nobody knows their treasurer, but yet Marlo's brilliant. So find the people who pay attention, who are good, that can be aware of this, because there's an assault, and we know how to counteract it, and it's by being aware of it, exercising agency, trusting in people, listening to people, just be aware of some of the things that are going on. When you hear something that sounds too crazy, research it. It's okay. Look at the facts behind it and see if they're real. And maybe it's not always on the internet. You might have to look a little deeper than that.
Well, and I think also it's good to remember, as something that I've talked to you about in the past, it's good to remember that you as an individual are not required to partake in politics in all forms, right? We don't have to tackle every issue. You want to follow your interests where your interests and the political arena intersect. That's a good place to start.
Yep. So there's a philosophy in business that says don't invest in anything you don't know anything about. And it's okay with politics as well. You don't need to know everything inside out, but the things that interest you, the things that get your attention, bring those to the attention of your elected representatives. Because a lot of times, particularly on government overreach, when government overreach happens, many times it's because your legislator doesn't know they're overreaching. And so once the legislature learns what the overreach is, if you look at it and say, this doesn't make sense, this can't be happening, it probably shouldn't be happening, but the legislature needs to know about it so that they can write a law to prevent the overreach. As a legislature, they are lawmakers, and the lawmaker should not be to control the people. The lawmaker should be to free the people and restrain the government entities into the lane. And you can't just say, well, you'll just operate according to this law. They can't do that because there's so many variables. They have to be able to write policies and procedures. But when their policies and procedures push over and take away agency, it's time to throttle them back.
And I think I loved your point that you made about how they are your representative. They work for you. And so don't be afraid to reach out to them and ask questions and try to learn and try to understand how to support them in doing their job. I think that's really important to understand that dynamic, that they don't work for anyone, but the people they represent.
Let me tell you, legislators, we all look at our legislatures and think, oh, these guys are so busy, I don't want to bother them with my little question. They're not. They don't get that many emails that they can't respond back. And for the most part, they ought to be responding back themselves to their own emails. Unless it's a big issue that there's a lot of correspondence, then they have staff that helps them respond. But for the most part, you should expect to hear back from your representative of their viewpoint. And their viewpoint may conflict with your viewpoint, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater, but if they consistently conflict with your viewpoint, then you find a new person to support in the next election.
Yeah, and we've been over a lot of really interesting topics and different ways that people can become involved. I want to kind of circle back and say that I think one of the things that has impressed me about you as an entrepreneur and politically as well is that you have an immense amount of hope for the future. So even though you are very aware of what's going on and maybe you don't always appreciate some of the things and you know that there's work to do, you still have a lot of hope. Tell me about that and why that is.
I do. I think for one thing, I think our little valley is the land of opportunity. I think if somebody is, I mean, sometimes I'll have people call and say, hey, do you know where I can get a job? I don't, because I don't know how to find a job, but I do know how to start a business and what it takes to make it successful. And I've talked to a lot of people. It's not something I charge for or anything. It's just, I just enjoy business, and I would help anyone just get in and get that. But do your research on a business before you start it. But I have hope. I believe that we're in good hands. When we elect people, they're elected by people who are like-minded, and therefore they represent us well. And I just trust that they make good decisions. And when somebody oversteps their bounds, I don't mind holding people accountable. I don't like controversy, but I will handle controversy just fine if it's wrong. But not everybody has to deal with the controversy. You don't have to. You can push that off on your representative and expect that they will handle the controversy. And it's easy to know which ones they'll take up. Because if it's obviously wrong, then they should get in the middle of it. So,
That's good.
I have all the hope in the world. I think we're on a good path. We just have to understand what it takes to hold people accountable, and if they can't be held accountable, they need to be replaced.
Yeah, excellent. So tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now. I know you have a lot of different projects going on and a lot of things on your plate. Tell us a little bit about that.
Politically?
Well, and also entrepreneurially. I know you're doing a lot of different things right now.
There's a lot of different projects that I do. I'm a little bit OCD, I guess, because I can't stay focused on any one thing. But we work on. We've still got that field that we provide gas to the companies with, and I just do a lot of different little things. I don't know.
Consulting and landscaping, and you love a lot of different industries. I'm finding.
I like business consulting. I have done that. I generally only do it for one company at a time, but one thing I like to do is help people migrate from a small business to a big business. Not to help them become a big business, but a lot of times people become a big business, but they're still operating out of their garage. And so it's kind of a transition to help them transition from small to big and get their structure how it needs to be. So that's one thing that I do enjoy, and that's been really rewarding.
Oh, very nice. And politically,
I'm going to run for the House of Representatives.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I would represent the community well. I think the people that I run against would represent the community well. I just think that I have an advantage because I do pay very close attention to a lot of political things, and I don't focus on one specific area. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we'll run for it, and hopefully the delegates will vote for me.
Yeah. Very good. Well, you seem like a strategic thinker as an entrepreneur, and you kind of know how it is kind of interesting to see how the entrepreneurial process carries over into politics. That's something that I'm seeing more and more, the tie and how entrepreneurship can really enact a lot of change in your local communities as well. And so the two are very aligned, and how they're just different avenues of getting kind of to that same solution. So I think I appreciate the entrepreneurial mindset in a politician. That's actually something that I personally look for, because I think that a lot of those skill set transfers really well into politics. So,
capitalism is, that's the answer to most of the ills of the world. It really is. And capitalism, I get it. It has its faults. There are faults. It can be abused. I understand that. But it is the catalyst that has lifted the world out of poverty and has the ability to continue that, even though there are forces, real forces, actively trying to destroy capitalism. Capitalism has to succeed.
For those who aren't super well versed in economics and all of that, can you kind of give us like a simplified answer as to why that is? What drives that?
On capitalism, because the weak ideas get weeded out and the good ideas rise to the top. And it works in politics and it works in business. If you have a good idea, there's kind of and I think it applies in a lot of areas, but in business, there's the introduction, the growth, the maturity, and then the decline in a business. And that's kind of a product life cycle or a business life cycle. And while a business is growing, that's where the majority of the profit in a business is made. When it hits maturity, your business is at risk, because at maturity is where competition can come in. So the only way to keep from hitting maturity and going into decline is what they call a line extension. So you find a new way to do something or a new product to offer that ties in with what you're already doing, and then put that on the product life cycle where you're introducing and then growing, and then it'll hit maturity. So as you look at different business ventures, just be aware of maturity. You can hit maturity, but beware of the decline, because that's where businesses. I'll give an example. I have a friend who started a business called Floppy Copy, and he would copy floppy disks for businesses to use as their owner's manual.
And for our younger listeners, tell them what a floppy disk is.
Okay. A floppy disk is before a CD.
There you go.
And a CD is one of those round things.
Oh, yeah. We might need to go through a few steps here.
But he started a business called Floppy Copy, and he was doing well. He made copies for all kinds of people for owner's manuals. And these businesses started requesting they be done in CDs, and he didn't have the duplication machines to do CDs, and his business basically withered away and died because everybody went to CDs. And he did really well, and at a time he was doing well, he probably should have been putting away to be able to buy the CD duplicators. But instead, he lived really well off of it while it lasted.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got to be able to watch the market, see what's happening in the market, and adjust to the market, or you'll end up selling out to someone who sees your weakness.
And to your point, competition is what really drives that innovation. And if you're willing to partake in that process, can really propel an already established business into an area where they may have to pivot to get there. But yep. I mean, competition's
good.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with competition. You just have to be able to outthink your competitors and offer a more valuable product, and you'll be fine. But if you try to skimp, your competitors will see it and they'll take advantage of it, and then you'll be trying to compete to get back into the market. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really fun conversation for me to have. I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have as well. Where can we find your information if we want to reach out about your campaign or about your consulting? Where do we find you?
Okay. So my email address for campaign stuff is troy@utahhouse.org. My email address is troy@cut.net, and you can contact me either way, or I'm on social media as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here with us today. I wanted to thank Tim Bingham for helping us with our audiovisual services today. Really appreciate that, and we will see you next time.